I presume you're here in order to learn of Magecraft. I'll have you know, there's no room for the weak-willed in this course, and despite your best efforts, the sorcery of our time is but a fraction of what it once was in the Age of Gods. Much of the craft is established through pedigree, and the culture of mages is riddled with deception and moral depravity. That said, if you insist, I shall do my best to educate you in this miserable, yet fascinating world. Today I shall speak of the foundations of Magecraft, also called thaumaturgy. In essence, Magecraft is the reenactment of mystery, performed by mortal man. Mystery, in broad strokes, refers to the supernatural, exceptions to the workings of our planet Earth. To become master over nature is to derive power from a source that supersedes nature. In other words, to access the root. The swirl of the root is known by many names. Akasha, the vortex of radix, even heaven to an extent, though technically it can have no name. It is an empty space beyond the world and time, a metaphysical locale from which all existence comes and ultimately returns to. Our very souls emerge from the root as concepts given form, or origins. We call such things mysteries, precisely because we lack a firm grasp on their nature. Why do we exist? Just what is life? Do we have a purpose? These ontological inquiries have plagued us since our inception, and mages look to the root for answers. It is aptly named Akasha for the Akashic Records, an archive of the world's nearly infinite possibilities. There was once a time when the world flourished with magical energy, or mana. Some mages were hailed as magicians, able to channel energy directly from the root with ease, enacting miracles. This Age of Gods is named precisely because of its gods, beings of divinity granted life through human worship. Various creatures, phantasmals, roamed the earth in abundance, and yet such times are no more. The Age of Gods declined as man began to rely more upon science, which admittedly has its merits, but wound up leaving these mysterious beings with no choice but to abandon our realm, the world, for a separate space, the reverse side of the world. Since then, mankind's greatest legends exist only as such, mere legends. Stories that are nigh impossible to verify. Yet, mages continue to recreate these miracles, and have almost universally made it their goal to establish a connection with the root once more. Magecraft, then, is only the mimicry of miracles, a far cry from the true magic of those who manage to reach the root and live to speak of it. This is the greatest achievement for a mage, to seek the swirl of the root and obtain true magic. In other words, to transcend from magus to magician. In all of human history, only 5 mages have successfully done so. They are truly magnificent, using their acquired magics to master the human experience. In an academic sense, it encourages mages to continue their pursuit, and yet they all struggle under the same exact dilemma. The very will of our own planet wishes to keep us from the root. This is a function of the deterrent force, otherwise known as the counterforce. Possessing true magic allows for one to, if inclined, drastically threaten the Earth and its inhabitants on a global scale. To prevent this, the planet's will manifests in 2 forms, Gaia and Alaya. Gaia prioritizes the survival of the Earth itself, whereas Alaya is a unique derivative, prioritizing humans as an important part of the Earth. The system is not without its flaws, however, as the pursuits of humanity are occasionally at odds with the well-being of the Earth. With trends throughout history, such as the decline of the Age of Gods, Gaia and Alaya have diverged and will occasionally conflict with one another. The question remains, just what does the counterforce look like? Because of its nature, mages find it hard to identify. It is, for the most part, intangible, a force which acts to manipulate the world by passively steering humans away from danger, like the hands of fate. As such, it can be difficult to determine if and how it will react in various situations. But nonetheless, mages find themselves failing to reach the root without a scheme or power strong enough to overcome it. Of course, the counterforce also intervenes in worldwide threats by employing agents who pledge themselves to it. These are counter-guardians, but their relevance will be addressed in another lecture. Noteworthy examples of mages trying to thwart the counterforce include Soren Araya and the Einsburns. Araya was a Buddhist monk who preserved his mortality for 300 years. By witnessing countless deaths, he developed a sense for perceiving people's origins. Combining this knowledge with practical studies at the clock tower, Araya devised a method of bypassing the counterforce that involved the rarity known as Ryogi Shiki. Her origin, nothingness, maintains a constant connection to the root itself. Araya wished to use her and her mystic eyes of death perception to trace this connection to the root. To distract the counterforce, he caused conflict between Shiki and other descendants of demon hunters, while also constructing the Ogawa apartment complex, an architectural feat invoking yin and yang, sheltering the repeated deaths of its inhabitants. Even with all this preparation, he still failed, as the counterforce operated through Shiki to slay him. The very phenomena we call the Holy Grail War was originally designed as a means of bypassing the counterforce. At its core was a complex spell infused with homunculi called the Greater Grail, which granted mages the ability to summon heroic spirits, a feature intended to be used only by the counterforce. By using the counterforce's own heroic spirit system against itself, mages would summon powerful familiars, who, when defeated, would return to the pure mana that comprised them. This mana would be siphoned into a vessel, the Lesser Grail. The Einsburns planned to use this tremendous stockpile of mana to form a direct path to the root. This concludes our lesson for today. In summation, all things that exist come from and will eventually return to the root. Magecraft has steadily declined on Earth since its inception, and mages of the modern era seek the answers to life's deepest questions. At the core of our universe, mages seek the root's power to transcend their magecraft and obtain true magic. This ambition is at odds with the planet's own will to protect itself and the humans who reside on it. Thus, very few mages have ever succeeded in obtaining true magic, with their attempts to reach the root becoming more and more elaborate. In my next lecture, we will go over the known true magics and their wielders, which I hope will serve to demonstrate precisely why ordinary mages covet the root so ambitiously. Until then, class is dismissed. You are welcome to ask me pertinent questions if you so choose, but do bear in mind that we still have much to cover. In our first and previous lesson in Magecraft, I divulged the secrets of the Swirl of the Root, as well as its role in the ambitions of mages. More specifically, I noted how mages covet the root to obtain knowledge of the Akashic records, and more iconically, true magic. Indeed, true magic is a tier above the standard practices of thaumaturgy. It not only manipulates the world around us, it transcends physical laws in feats we can only describe as miracles. It calls into question the very foundations of our mortal realm in ways that can either serve our damnation or salvation at the whim of the user. As such, it is time to ruminate on all we know of the 5 currently documented magics, and the mages who managed to channel them through a direct pathway between the root and themselves. Admittedly, it is of great shame that the first magic, for being one of the oldest, is shrouded in mystery. Even among those at the clock tower, the identity of its magician goes unnamed. What little is made public is that this magician died long ago. This isn't to say we lack any record of the first magic's use, however. Stepping off the charted course for a bit, I will speak of Ether, one of the 5 great elements. Unlike the more naturally occurring fire, water, earth, and wind, ether, also called void, is an artificial form of mana that, when combined with other elements, gives form to shapeless bodies, such as spirits. Should a mage fail this materialization, the resulting product is a liquid clay known as an ether clump. It is a strange byproduct, deemed useful only as a conductor for mana, but has nonetheless been utilized by mages for various purposes. The puppet maker, Toko Aozaki, has used ether clumps in the production of her automata. Her rival, Cornelius Alba, used them in the creation of slime familiars. More iconically though, ether clumps are famed for being a principal component in the body of Einsburn homunculus Liesrit. It is said that the first magic pertains to the creation of these ether clumps. What that looks like, tragically, is a spectacle we have yet to behold. One might think that, with the death of a magician, so too dies the magic. This is not always the case, as mage descendants can inherit the path to the root, effectively transferring the magic's exclusive use to future generations. While the mage who obtained the first magic is no more, it is believed that the magic still exists with its current heir. Granted, mages are not one to cooperate in times of conflict, and the whereabouts of this heir remain under the strict disclosure of the Bartholomew clan. This family is of the 3 great noble families of the Clock Tower, icons of mage aristocracy. They raise their mages with such pedigree that heirs do not see the light of day until they are masters in their craft. While nobody officially knows of the first magician, the Bartholomew clan considers this individual mage their only equal. Proud words, I must commend. They seem to believe the first magic's latest possessor is still alive, although barely. Again, the full nature of their condition remains secret. In contrast, we have plenty of knowledge on both the second magic and its wielder, for he is perhaps the most acclaimed mage of all, Keisher Zelrech Schweinorg. He is both alive and infamous within the Clock Tower, and yet he's lived for over several centuries. Utilizing Magecraft, there are certainly ways for a mage to prolong their life, but his circumstances are unique. His blood was sucked by a vampire, turning him into a superior dead apostle. Rather than siding with others of his kind, Zelrech still chooses to ally himself with humanity. In his youth, which goes further back than we can recount, he managed to open a pathway to the root and acquire the second magic, Kaleidoscope. Our previous lesson covered the Akashic Records as being the vast knowledge of all potential universes. Zelrech harnesses the second magic to traverse between these worlds, most notably visiting a history in which true ancestors once flourished on Earth. In fact, his immortality came from a fight in this world against Brunstud of the Crimson Moon, the ultimate being from our very own satellite. Forgive me for overstepping the scope of this lecture. Such tales are only to bolster Zelrech's fame and how the second magic allowed him to achieve the unthinkable. Kaleidoscope causes what is called a dimensional refraction phenomenon, the process of creating openings into parallel universes. This is seen when he wields his mystic code, the jeweled sword Zelrech. Through the refraction phenomenon, it draws mana from parallel worlds with limitless potential. Though Zelrech was known for taking pupils on a whim, most were traumatized by his tutelage. That is, with the exception of Nagato Tosaka. For his righteous nature, Zelrech decided to teach him and impart knowledge of the jeweled sword's design. Zelrech thought nothing would come of this, underestimating the Tosaka lineage, until 6 generations later, the family's successor, Rin Tosaka, manages to recreate the sword, though admittedly, she has some help. In another of many parallel worlds, Zelrech remains at the Clock Tower, using his research to craft 2 other mystic codes, the Kaleidosticks, Magical Ruby and Sapphire. Much like the jeweled sword, these sticks draw infinite quantities of mana, with the obscure restriction that they be used exclusively by girls. It is worth noting that, in this world, Lord El Malloy II, formerly known as Waver Velvet, serves under Zelrech. Moving on, we have the third magic, which is ironically the most well-known, despite having been lost for over 1,000 years. Originally living prior to the death of Christ, an ancestor of the Einsburn family of mages managed to obtain the third magic. Unfortunately, this mage mysteriously disappeared, and the magic was deemed lost. Since that time, the Einsburns created a homunculus factory, desperately trying to produce a specimen with similar qualities to the absent magician. Eventually, over 8 centuries, their efforts resulted in the homunculus, Justiz Liedrich von Einsburn. The family placed all their hopes onto her, believing she could possibly reproduce the lost magic. Due to a lack of efficiency, however, she was deemed a failure. Humans of the Einsburns either left or killed themselves, leaving only their homunculi to continue onward, which they did. In a grand effort to reopen their path to the root, Justiz teamed up with other mage families to establish the Greater Grail and the Heaven's Feel ritual, which in practice became the Holy Grail War. That said, just what is this magic? Heaven's Feel is described as a magic that allows for the materialization of the soul. While all things come from the root, living beings exist as a combination of a soul and body. Of them, the soul is what contains a person's mind, memories, and precious magic circuits. The soul relies on the body to anchor itself to the world, for without a body, it would disperse and return to the root. This, naturally, occurs when those of the living ultimately die, and is generally inescapable. Mages, such as Zokin Mato, have tried to continue living by transplanting their souls from one body to another, only to suffer the side effect of their souls decaying over time. The magic of Heaven's Feel eliminates this problem. It materializes the soul such that it no longer disperses when not anchored to a body. The effect is akin to transcendence, turning one from a being bound by mortality to one whose consciousness is everlasting. At the end of the Fifth Holy Grail War, the Einsburn descendant Eliasfeel dons the Dress of Heaven, a mystic code made from her servant Lisrit's body, and uses it to temporarily access this magic, preserving the soul of Shiro Emiya long enough to be transplanted into an automaton body without decay. In a separate instance, the heroic spirit turned mortal mage, Amakusa Shiro Tokisara, yearned to invoke Heaven's Feel onto the entire planet, effectively preserving humanity at the cost of its consent and free will. With all this attention, it is often difficult to recall that there is, presumably, a fourth true magic, at least as believed by mages of the modern era. It's embarrassing, really. Without any objective hint of evidence, modern mages insist that an unnamed magus managed to open a pathway to the root, acquire true magic, and survive with it, all while never being discovered or documented. The nature of this mage, and their magic, continue to remain pure speculation. While the fourth magic is unobserved, the fifth magic is easily misunderstood. It is named Magic Blue, and was obtained by Aoko Aozaki after her grandfather opened a path to the root years prior. Though her sister, Toko Aozaki, possessed perhaps the greatest magic circuits known to man, Aoko was still selected to succeed the family and inherit the fifth magic despite minimal training in Magecraft. At the age of 17, only 2 years into her late training, Aoko was attacked by her sister. Enraged at being raised and abandoned at the last moment, denied access to the root, Aoko, the only one able to use the fifth magic, did so for the first time in an attempt to save the life of Sojiro Shizuki, who had been killed in their fight. At first glance, the fifth magic appears to allow for time travel, but that is something the second magic can already accomplish. Even so, Aoko sensed the tremendous power of the fifth magic granted to her, and intuitively used it in something akin to time travel. Since Sojiro is already dead, and she could not revive him, she instead cheated the law of conservation of matter. She took the 5 minutes of Sojiro's death and placed them 10 years into the future, then claimed 10 years of his time for herself. With this time, Aoko channeled the knowledge and abilities she amassed over those 10 years, making her present self far stronger and more adept. This phenomenon caused her to redshift, lighting up her hair in a bright crimson. Continually using localized time travel, Aoko proceeded to dodge all of her sister's attacks and counter with the strength of multiple of her own iterations. She would shift strikes of hers to different times, preventing Toko from reacting to them. Though Aoko defeated Toko, it came at a tremendous cost. The energy from sending Sojiro's death into the future would also place the burden of that time travel into the future, causing a heat death for the universe. Aoko continues to shoulder the responsibility for this mishap, hoping to one day resolve the conservational anomaly. To clarify, the fifth magic, from an observable perspective, seems to be capable of exchanging time, rather than simply traversing it. It should go without saying that truly understanding this phenomenon is a study in itself. Having seen only the effects and not the source, the fifth magic's true nature is unidentified and subject for further research. In summation, there exist 5 true magics, obtained by mages opening a path to the root, which we call Gates of Akasha. So long as they remain open, the magics do not die with their mages. While it has yet to happen, mages cling to the hopes of discovering a 6th magic. Of the current 5, only 3 of them have been witnessed and documented. The second magic, Kaleidoscope, allows for the operation of parallel worlds. The third, Heaven's Feel, allows for the materialization of the soul. And the fifth, Magic Blue, appears to allow for temporal exchange, though its true nature and potential has yet to fully emerge. These magics defy the laws of our world, and will presumably survive until the unlikely day such miracles can be recreated by normal means. At best, mankind has managed to perform feats that rival the true magics. Kojiro Sasaki, the famed samurai warrior, realizes something akin to Kaleidoscope with his Tsubame Gaeshi. Medea's Magecraft, back during the Age of Gods, was powerful enough to compare as well. Kiritsugu Emiya's ability, Time Alter Double Excel, also pushes the bounds of our reality. These remain just shy of full miracles, preserving the root's importance as the pinnacle of a mage's ambitions. This concludes today's lesson. In the future, I hope to enlighten you to the concept of origins and the elements. These will prove useful before tackling specific spells and techniques. In our previous lesson in Magecraft, I revealed as much as mages currently know about the 5 true magics and their respective magicians. While reaching the root and obtaining such magic is the pinnacle achievement for a mage, the majority of our curriculum will be far more pragmatic. Essentially, rather than focusing on phenomena we might perform, it is essential we focus on what we can perform. The first step in doing so is to understand how the world around us operates and what role we living beings play in its ecosystem. More specifically, we shall focus on the concepts of origins and elements. I've already mentioned that all things that exist in the universe come from and return to the root. But precisely what does that entail? The clearest explanation I can provide is that the root releases concepts that take material form. While humans are naturally born from sexual reproduction, every newborn child is but a concept that once slipped from the root. This is an origin, a latent driving force that exists within all individuals. Origins are abstract, such that mages are barely able to characterize them with words alone. The concepts of origins are fascinating. in that they characterize us all as unique existences, despite sharing the commonality of being human. A romanticized statement such as, "That man is death incarnate," can actually serve as a literal definition. The extent to which one's origin affects one's daily life has everything to do with how much one is awakened to one's origin. For some, most perhaps, the origin remains dormant. It may take shape in a quirk of the personality, a general alignment, or affinity. For others, the origin is far more present, perhaps granting individuals unique talents that defy their humanity. Despite this, one thing remains certain. If a person is awakened to their origin, they will most certainly be unable to stray from it. At this stage, an origin can and will consume one's very nature. The autonomy of consciousness will take a back seat, as the origin guides one like an instinct or compulsion. Thankfully, this is rare. Oftentimes, a mage's own origin can prevent them from their practices and pursuits. Very few mages are even capable of waking others to their origins. In terms of documented cases, we have the Ryogi family and Sorin Araya. The Ryogi, a family of former demon hunters, had a ritual to awaken the origin of infants. They intentionally used this technique to capitalize on the origin of Ryogi Shiki, which is emptiness, resulting in a child with a direct connection to the root. In pursuit of Shiki's limitless potential, Sorin Araya used his own ability to awaken the origins of potential pawns after gaining their consent, albeit deceptively. Perhaps Shiki's salvation came as a result of her lover Kokuto's origin. While it lacks a name, it shaped him into the ultimate pacifist, one that will never hurt others. It drove his compassionate personality, letting him trust in Shiki at all times. Shiki's employment to Toko Aozaki led her to encounter many foes and victims of Araya's scheming. Tomoe Enjo, a young man born to an impoverished family, was caught up in the Ogawa apartment complex incident. The design of the complex heightened the tension between his parents, causing them to kill one another repeatedly. Sorin implanted in him a subconscious interest in Shiki as a form of bait to lead her in. His origin is worthlessness. While its effects weren't strong, the origin did influence his low self-esteem, which he overcompensated for through his persistence. This lack of self-worth enabled him to more easily put his life on the line to rescue Shiki and thwart Araya's plans. In the grand scheme of things, we might consider them lucky, as origins can be far more compelling. Ryo Shirazumi was one of Shiki's classmates in high school. In an attempt to impress her, he picked a fight with a school bully, accidentally killing him in the process. Uncertain of how to cover his tracks and hide the body, Ryo panicked. The stress, the trauma, caused his origin to partially awaken. Gruesomely, that origin was eating consumption. As if he truly were a ferocious beast, Ryo began to devour the corpse until restraining himself and throwing up. Sorin Araya, intrigued by Ryo's awakening, offered to fully awaken the origin. When Ryo accepted, he began to salivate profusely. His strength and reflexes increased, twisting his human form into that of a wild cannibal. While it helped him finish eating the body and avoid arrest, Ryo's origin would prove to be a living nightmare. Compelled to consume, he continually murdered city residents at night, seeking Shiki's validation as a presumed murderer herself. Ultimately, nothing could save the poor wretch, aside from the sweet release of death by Shiki's blade. Origins exist for every living being, but can play an important role in Magecraft. A profound example is the origin of Shiro Emiya. From a technical standpoint, Shiro is a mage, albeit with painfully weak magic circuits, compounded by a lack of magic crest. On his own, he could only channel mana to interpret and reinforce the structure of physical objects. Though his adoptive father, Kiritsugu, could not transfer the Emiya magic crest, he bestowed quite possibly a greater gift. Avalon, the scabbard of the holy sword Excalibur, was implanted into the boy to save him from Fuyuki's great fire at the end of the Fourth Holy Grail War. Mages have yet to confirm whether this was always the case, but following the acquisition of Avalon, Shiro's origin was that of sword. In concept, this made him the mortal embodiment of swords. In practice, it allowed him the ability to project, or more accurately, trace, the form and history of swords he had seen in life. This is an extremely obscure and specific form of magecraft, made possible only through following one's origin. A milder example can be seen with Kiritsugu Emiya. His origin, severing and binding, had little effect on his personal life, but then his mentor Natalia ground 2 of his ribs to dust and implanted his soul into 66 individual bullets. These origin bullets allow Kiritsugu to activate his origin inside the bodies of those the bullets pierce. When used on other mages, their activation will sever their magic circuits and bind them together improperly. These bullets leave their targets permanently crippled, with their magic circuits tangled and overblown. By combining his origin with technology, Kiritsugu proves himself to be an unusual magus, fit for the title of Mage Killer. Like magic circuits themselves, origins are part of a genetic lottery, so to speak. We have no consistent method of shifting or controlling them. For some, they are a defining strength, while for others they are self-destructive. In a similar fashion, we have elements. Studies such as alchemy and theologies like those of ancient Greece all have their own number and terminology to describe the elements, such as fire, wind, and water. But the Mages Association categorizes them into a basic 5, known as the Great Elements. These are fire, earth, water, wind, and ether. We have the diligent studies of Magus Paracelsus von Hohenheim to thank for these classifications. In essence, these elements merely serve to sort varied forms of magecraft. Fire, for instance, does not simply refer to the rapid oxidization of materials. It also encompasses spells pertaining to consumption, entropy, energy transfer, consumption, and thermodynamics. Earth is not simply the planet we stand upon, but also spells of grounding and embedding. Water is not simply the fluid itself, but flows, forms, and cycles as well. Wind is not simply air, but an array of kinetic forces. Consequently, ether lacks a form of its own. As an imaginary factor, it combines with the other elements in the production of spells. Certain bloodlines of mages have particular elemental affinities. Like origins, they can be unique to the individual, but also tend to share a hereditary consistency. Some iconic elemental affinities include Luvia Gelita Edelfelt and Waver Velvet's affinity to earth, Tokiomi Tosaka's affinity to fire, the Aozaki family's affinity to wind, and the Mato family's affinity to water. Sakura Mato, before being indoctrinated into the Mato family, had no particular affinity at all. In contrast, Rin Tosaka is an incredibly gifted mage with an affinity to all 5 elements. When it comes to thaumaturgical study, a mage's elemental affinity may help guide them into specializing in particular spells or styles over others. Think of them as the varied flavors of magecraft. In addition, there are some other elements not commonly attributed to mages. Hollow, for instance, is an element tied to traversing imaginary number space. Put bluntly, this refers to a space different from the world in its reverse side. It is best thought of as an alternate plane or dimension. The few mages who do have an affinity for this element typically use spells to store matter from our plane into imaginary space. This is seen when Trisha Fellows hides her still-living head in imaginary space. When Sakura Mato was linked to Angra Mainyu with fragments of the Lesser Grail implanted into her heart, the mysterious shadow and its fodder could be considered a form of imaginary space. Atlas alchemists often deal in human factors, which also tend to have affinities. In short, humans consist of 3 factors: the body, mind, and soul, which are studied in Atlas just as carefully as the great elements. In summation, There are two major forces that work to characterize mages and their abilities. The first is the origin, the concept that slips from the root and materializes to form living things. Each human has an origin, and while they normally have a subtle effect on a human's personality, origins can wake within humans to compel and control them. For mages specifically, there are elements tied to the various spells mages use, and most mages and mage families have an affinity toward one or more of these elements, influencing the kinds of spells a mage is likely to pursue and master. This concludes today's lesson. In the future, I wish to discuss magical energy itself, mana. We will explore where mana comes from and how it's used when evoking spells. In our previous lesson in Magecraft, I covered the various thaumaturgical elements and the concept of origins. It is nigh impossible to discuss Magecraft without understanding them. The same can be said of today's lesson, which will provide an overview of the fundamental energy we mages use, mana. Also called prana, or magical energy, mana is a form of energy produced by the world. For our purposes, it is the life force of our planet Earth, as well as that of other celestial bodies. Generally, it is found in the very atmosphere around us, though it was certainly more prevalent during the Age of Gods. The many nature spirits of that time fed off this energy and served Gaia, the planet's will. Before humankind developed further in the realm of science, mages benefited greatly from the sheer density of mana in the air, allowing for magecraft to be more easily performed on a large scale. Certainly, mana still remains even in our modern era, but mages have obviously become less reliant on it. Let us not forget, however, that humans are a part of the planet. As such, we too possess our own mana, our very life force used as energy. The proper name for this energy is Ode. Living organisms generate this energy from their own magic circuits, replenishing it whenever depleted. While Ode is more readily accessible, it amounts to much less than what can be found in the atmosphere. Thus, Ode is considered to be the lesser source, while the mana of the planet is the greater source. Even with abundant atmospheric mana, the energy used for spells must be converted through magic circuits before it can be released. Ode might sound quite convenient, but there is a reason mages during the Age of Gods were far superior. The amount of Ode stored by a magus is so little that it is only useful for small-scale spells that hardly interact with the environment. Reinforcement Magecraft is one such spell. It makes sense that an inept magus like Shiro Emiya found this to be the only spell he could formally conjure. Another example would be Rin Tosaka's Gando shots. Even the best mages merely use their Ode as a starting point for larger spells. They still rely on mana from the atmosphere to maintain said spells. Point being, there is only so much a mage can do on their own. But just how much can a mage rely on their Ode? As it turns out, the amount of Ode stored by a mage can be measured with reasonable accuracy, quantified as units of magical energy. You may be surprised by the contrast in capacity between mages. Many of the famous mages you're familiar with are exceptionally well endowed. The average magus from an ordinary bloodline can store 25 units of magical energy. Shiro is generally able to store 20 units, but has achieved as much as 30 at full maturity. The Tosaka daughters, Rin and Sakura, were born with splendid bodies. They can store 500 units, with their maximum output being 1,000. This is one of the main reasons why Kenneth L. Malloy Archibald belittled his student Waver Velvet for trying to negate the importance of lineage and heredity. There is hardly any room for comparison, and explains why mage families, like the Mato, are terrified of weakening over generations. Tragically, in Sakura's case, much of her Ode is devoured by the crestworms slithering through her flesh. The Tosaka are powerful for the modern era, but pale in comparison to Medea, a mage from the Age of Gods. A single blast of her light consumes 3 times Shiro's capacity, and she fires them off in waves of 10 at a time without delay. Essentially, she can spend Reen's highest capacity and simply shrug it off. In a humble attempt to compensate, modern mages often supplement their magecraft with training in the martial arts. Heroic spirits also have an ode capacity. While this capacity is high, a servant's ode does not automatically regenerate. Instead, it is replenished by their master. Artoria Pendragon, when contracted with Shiro, survives off of 1,300 units of energy. This is detrimental, considering Shiro lacks the ability to replenish that mana through conventional means. In her first day serving him, Artoria spent 250 units, and the majority of that remaining balance was spent using Excalibur to defeat Medusa and her Pegasus. This strained her to the point where she could hardly keep her balance. Thankfully, while Shiro's contract with Artoria couldn't forward mana to her, he had another way of transferring that mana. The ode in a mage has a tendency to blend in with their bodily fluids, namely blood and semen. Even when such fluids leave the body, that mana is retained for a time. Mages hard on their luck sometimes sell their mana-infused fluids for profit. Thanks to this peculiarity, with Reen's guidance, Shiro learned that he could replenish Saber's mana by having sexual intercourse with her. This intimacy is a critical part of certain mage rituals, and is most effective when both parties are at ease with one another. To allow Shiro the chance to conjure his unlimited blade works, Reen Tosaka relied on an intimate ritual that allowed Shiro to draw from her ode in his final battle against Gilgamesh. The less sensual approach is to have one mage drink the other's blood. Of course, this isn't always consensual. Shinji Mato is even less adept than Shiro, and for him to maintain Medusa as his loner servant, he had her drink human blood. Rare circumstances allow mages to store outrageous quantities of ode. Michael Roa Valdemjong was a vampire who tricked the true ancestor Arcuade Brunstud into drinking his blood, turning him into an extremely powerful dead apostle ancestor. As Arcuade continually hunted and killed him, Roa reincarnated into various bodies, and at one time took control of a French girl, Elysia. Even after being slain once more by Arcuade, being free from Roa's direct control, Elysia's body remained immortal and powerful, able to regenerate so long as Roa continued to reincarnate. Thanks to this undead connection, Elysia, later called Ciel, has a capacity of 2,500 units of ode. Sakura, when connected to the Greater Grail, manifesting under the influence of Angra Mainyu, contained as much as 1 trillion units. The last aspect of mana I wish to speak about is the concept of ley lines. Atmospheric mana is produced by the planet, but the concentration of that mana is uneven. Mana happens to be more dense along magical ley lines. Unseen to the naked eye, the Earth itself has a network of paths through which mana travels, similar to the blood vessels in the human body. Mages make use of these ley lines when performing large-scale spells to capitalize on their density. A particularly strong ley line flows through Fuyuki, Japan, which is why it was chosen as the site for the Heaven's Feel ritual. The monks at Ryudo Temple sensed this as a spot of spiritual activity. This land is seized by Medea as a home base, exclusively because it is situated over a ley line. That said, ley lines can also prove to be dangerous. The Mages Association makes regular attempts to maintain and stabilize them. Beyond being flows of magical energy, the ley lines also happen to be spots through which worlds can be traversed. The cave within Mount Enzo, the Ten no Sakazuki, for instance, is the location where the Ainsworth family infiltrated Ilia's world to retrieve Miu. In summation, mana is the lifeblood of celestial bodies, including Earth. It flows from ley lines and scatters through the atmosphere. Because humans are part of the planet, they too have mana, an internal source called Ode that is continually regenerated by a mage's magic circuits. Rudimentary spells can be cast exclusively from a mage's Ode, but Magecraft on a large scale requires mages to tap into the Earth's mana, which is tragically depleted since the end of the Age of Gods. This concludes today's lesson. In the future, I wish to discuss the key to a mage's lineage, the magic circuit. In our previous lesson in Magecraft, I covered the existence and proliferation of mana, both as it comes from the planet and the ode generated within our own bodies. That lesson noted a contrast in how vastly different some mages are from one another in terms of raw ability. Two major factors play into why. Such is the topic for today's lesson, the importance and application of a mage's magic circuits, as well as how a mage family passes on its talents in the form of magic crests. Much like our own nervous system, a mage's magic circuits spread throughout them and serve to convert their life force into mana. With keen knowledge of this, mages have been able to control their own circuits to manipulate the world, performing mysteries, or magecraft. Simply put, anyone without proficient magic circuits cannot practice thaumaturgy. Under normal circumstances, a human could not command the laws of nature, instead being but a victim to those laws. Therefore, magic circuits defy physics, being attached to a person without belonging to the material world. Rather, the part of us where said circuits reside is the soul. In previous lessons, I have spoken of the soul and how mages like Zoken Mato are able to extend their lifespans by transplanting their souls from one body to another. In that regard, the soul can be thought of as an astral blueprint of the body, containing its memories and mind, with astral simply referring to the immaterial part of our world. With the exception of a soul's tendency to rot over time, the soul is considerably more everlasting, and it's upon the soul that the magic circuit is etched. When we manage to physically observe the circuit, we are merely observing the point of contact between the soul and its vessel. This very sight has led some to believe that circuits are actually a part of a mage's body, which is certainly misleading. In truth, however, these circuits only manifest physically when accessed through the human brain. Thus, so long as a mage's brain is able to function, their circuits can be accessed even after the rest of their body is incapacitated. To our dismay, the quality and number of magic circuits mages possess are determined at birth. Much like our own genetics, one does not simply grow more, though they certainly can be irreparably damaged. As such, mages of ancient heritage often have superior circuits, while more ordinary bloodlines risk their circuits weakening with each generation. In most cases, humans aren't likely to be born with magic circuits in the first place. Just like breeding, the quality and number of magic circuits a mage is born with comes down to pedigree. That said, mages can excel with either quality or quantity. For instance, Aozaki family heirs are born with fewer circuits at a higher quality, and their talents are certainly formidable. Of course, practices in Magecraft have allowed us to curb this hereditary limitation to a degree. Our previous lesson, in fact, mentioned such a technique utilized by Shiro Emiya and Rin Tosaka, in which Shiro was able to link himself and pull from Rin's circuits in order to conjure unlimited blade works. Technically speaking, Kirei Kotomine's circuits came as a mutation, a gift to reward his father's continued piety. Like all things, the possession of magic circuits comes at a cost. While they are critical for a person to be a mage in the first place, they aren't exactly pleasant. They are unnatural and conflict with the human body. Utilizing them can be excruciatingly painful and cause one's body to generate heat. As much of a boon as they can often be, mages have had this sensation exploited by hunters, such as Kiritsugu Emiya, who could track his targets with thermal sensors. Thankfully, when used properly, most of this pain comes from first activating circuits. By flooding mana through them, they effectively open for easier access. That is, unless a mage is unaware of this process. Shiro Emiya was improperly reared by Kiritsugu. Rather than tapping into his already opened magic circuits, he would reform them with each and every use. His daily training involved putting his life in danger to harness even the most rudimentary of spells. It was a mistake so outrageous that not even Rin was able to realize his struggle. Only his future self was privy to this handicap. Once opened, magic circuits become much easier to access. To invoke them, a mage simply needs a mental trigger. a cognitive visualization to symbolize their channeling. Shiro feels his circuits akin to the firing of a gun, the hammer slamming down, whereas Rin pictures a knife piercing her heart. The more immediate the trigger, the better, as mages with poor conditioning may be inadvertently trained to access their circuits only in times of danger or arousal. On average, a mage has approximately 20 magic circuits. Given the Aozaki's low circuit count, it's actually astounding that Toko managed to have this many. Rin, of more exceptional birth, has 40. Shiro was in many ways lucky and unfortunate. He could have been born without circuits, like most ordinary people, but instead he happened to have 27. While this is above average, the quality of these circuits is devastatingly poor. They have low capacity and can easily be damaged if stressed too far, which given his temperament is frequent. The last point to note about circuits is that they aren't the only way for an individual to harness mana. In the case of Artoria Pendragon and Siegfried, both entwined with the blood of a dragon, have what's called a magic core. The blood within them serves as a mana-generating factory. Other mystic codes have the capacity to serve as mana reactors, such as Prelati's spellbook, which tragically fell into the hands of Gilles de Rais. While a mage's magic circuits determine their innate potential, wiser, more prestigious families think not only of themselves, but of their descendants. Any one mage can be quite gifted and talented on their own, but compounded over generations, mages have the capacity to grow ever stronger. This is thanks to what is called a magic crest. Essentially, a magic crest is created when a mage engraves their own magical circuits onto their body, serving as an archive of their accomplishments. Unlike the circuits themselves, a magic crest can be transferred from one mage to another. This can supplement the number of magic circuits available to a mage, as well as pass on knowledge of certain spells, making them easier to cast. The more frequently this is done, the vaster the knowledge and potential of a family's later generations. For example, Rin Tosaka's magic crest is on her arm, and from it she inherited sub-circuits, each providing her 30 more to access. The fundamentals of her jewel Magecraft, as well as spells like Gundo, can be quickly accessed directly from her crest. Ultimately, this means that over half of Rin's magical capacity comes from her crest, which is amazing when you consider that she is already a biologically superior mage from the get-go. I hope this conveys just how important crests are. This vast potential more than justifies the strain involved with transferring them. Indeed, a magic crest can be transplanted in much the same way as an organ. In both cases, the genetic compatibility between donor and recipient is critical. Kairi Shishigo struggled with this, as he was rendered sterile, unable to produce a biological heir. He tried to pass his crest onto his adopted daughter, which caused her to die during the procedure. Ideally, a magic crest should be transferred in small portions over time, but that is not always an option, especially when a mage is killed. Such is the case for Rin. Her father, Tokiomi, due to the risk and outcome of the Fourth Holy Grail War, needed to expedite the transfer. While this succeeded, it continues to cause Rin pain, until she grows accustomed to the crest in maturity. She relieves the pain through the use of specialized medicinal herbs, which carry an unpleasant odor. Rin, self-conscious about the smell, masks it with perfume, a secret only divulged to her most intimate partner. Another downside of the magic crest is that it can only be transferred to one candidate. This becomes an issue with prolific mage families that produce many children. Coveting a family's crest has led to vicious internal feuds, or more tragically, cases like Sakura, who was adopted out of the family so that both Tosaka daughters could receive a crest of their own. In summation, all mages are born with magic circuits engraved in their souls. These are the mana pathways that allow mages to cast spells, and are generally determined by genetics and pedigree. How these circuits develop from generation to generation either makes or breaks the continued survival of a mage family. The only other controllable asset is a magic crest, the storing of mana in the form of shapes and sigils. While difficult to pass on, no one can deny the usefulness of crests in establishing a dominant mage family. Lastly, The practice of gathering and passing on a magic crest shares roots with another branch of Magecraft, rune spells. As such, I feel that covering runes will serve as a convenient segue into the various branches of Magecraft I aim to cover in further lessons. In our previous lesson in Magecraft, I covered both the magical circuits engraved upon a mage's soul and the symbolic crests mage families use to transfer their knowledge from one generation to another. The magic crests in particular are most closely related to an ancient form of thaumaturgy known as rune magecraft. Both share commonality in their use of symbology, the imbuing of world-shaping forces into letters and symbols. Runes as we know them originated in Scandinavia during the Age of Gods as a written language used by Norse and Germanic peoples. Rather than being merely letters for communication between humans, these runes were tied to varying cosmic powers. To that end, it is no surprise that the term rune means both letter and mystery. In short, they are symbols tied to supernatural aspects of our physical world, and can be invoked to cast spells based upon what they symbolize. According to Norse mythology, the runes were native to the Well of Erd and would only reveal themselves to those worthy of their powers. The great god Odin once coveted knowledge of the runes and ventured into the well after piercing himself with his spear, hanging precariously from a branch of Yggdrasil. He stared into the depths for 9 days and nights, accepting no help from other gods, until finally seeing the rune's shapes. Given their ancient origins, it is difficult to discern the absolute truth of such legends, leading the Mages Association to believe that perhaps the runes were not discovered by Odin, but in fact created by him. This lacks certainty, however. Rune Magecraft isn't exactly popular within the association. Of its affiliates, there are only a handful of mages who use them. The runes used today are, at best, pale imitations of Odin's primeval runes. Nonetheless, these modern runes are used frequently by Celtic mages such as Bizet Fraga Mikremitz and the likes of Toko Aozaki. This is because they are heavily rooted in Norse and Celtic culture, and using them requires profound understanding of their meaning. If mastered, however, rune magic can be exceptionally useful. In practice, runes are most effective when inscribed directly onto a mage's target, but they will also function at a distance, so long as the target lacks magical resistance. Runes are versatile, each one having various meanings that can be interpreted to a degree, allowing spells to take the shape their casters imagine them to be. Each symbol is not necessarily indicative of a given spell. Rather, they can be combined in different orders to create more complex spells. For instance, combined runes are able to create bounded fields. The primeval runes of Odin comprise most of the craft, although talented ancient mages like Skahak have knowledge of potentially older runes. As I mentioned before, however, mages hoping to utilize them now must rely upon modern runes that imitate the old. Our best way to understand them is to go over the various examples in which they are used. One of the most quintessential runes is Ansa's, which is the rune of order. Essentially, it represents bringing order to the world through language. Toko Aozaki once used this rune in an attempt to dispel the mischievous wraiths haunting Shiki Ryogi. The effect was a purifying flame, which ultimately failed, because the wraith's body was inhabiting a deceased mage who could resist it. To disperse both himself and the Einsburn castle, Irish legend Cú Chulainn invoked Ansuz to ignite the entire building. Algiz is a rune that symbolizes elk. Its connection with the gods invokes a higher presence to protect one from hidden dangers. Not This is a rune that symbolizes necessity. It is connected with resistance, which holds forms together. Ingaz is a rune that symbolizes seeds. It is associated with separation and isolation, allowing beings to transcend to higher states. When all 4 of these runes are used in proper succession, Mages are able to cast Ath Ngabala, a spell that curses two combatants to fight one another without refusal. It was most used by Cuchulainn and the Knights of the Red Branch in establishing a proper battlefield for duels. Birkenau is a rune that symbolizes the birch goddess. With the dawn of spring, the first tree to awaken is the birch, representing the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. In practice, Cuchulainn has used this rune to track targets by casting stones. Ehwaz is a rune that symbolizes the horse. It represents the contrast between mind and body, granting strength to vehicles used for travel. By inscribing this onto her gloves, Bazette is able to harden her fists enough to crush human heads in a single punch. Kenaz is a rune that symbolizes the torch. It is associated with knowledge, intellect, and illumination. Bazette is able to use this rune to enhance her own vision. Swirl is a rune that symbolizes the sun, functioning as a rune of fire. Tiwaz is a rune that symbolizes divine justice, named after the god Tyr. Thorizas is a rune that symbolizes giants. It imbues the same strength and energy as Thor's Mjolnir hammer. Wanjo is a rune that symbolizes joy, harmony, and the soul's will to achieve perfection. Gebu is a rune that symbolizes a gift. It is the same pagan symbol appropriated to represent the holiday of Christmas. It invokes sacrifice and fair exchange. Hagalaz is a rune that symbolizes hailstone, an embodiment of destruction, crisis, and catastrophe. Rydho is a rune that symbolizes a wagon. It represents freedom, travel, and journeying. Issa is a rune that symbolizes ice, embodying stillness in the dual nature of peace and serenity. Yera is a rune that symbolizes the year, more practically the harvest and annual cycles. Berthro is a rune that symbolizes the unknown. It pertains most to matters of fate and fortune. Uas is a rune that symbolizes yew, referring to the tree Yggdrasil. It more generally pertains to timelessness and immortality. Fehu is a rune that symbolizes cattle. It pertains to property, beginnings, and wealth. Uras is a rune that symbolizes aurochs. It is associated with formation, as it applies to structure, health, and solidarity. Manas is a rune that symbolizes mankind. It embodies all aspects of humanity. Lagos is a rune that symbolizes water, more broadly referring to the subconscious, dreams, and imagination. Degas is a rune that symbolizes the day. It is associated with awakenings and enlightenment. And lastly, there is Othala, a rune that symbolizes the homeland. It is a source of power coming from the estate and one's ancestry. It is the rune most approximate to a magic crest. Strangely enough, not all spells involved with rune magecraft actually require the use of a specific letter. Gundo is a Scandinavian curse that technically belongs to this category, even though it operates by releasing the curse from its user's index finger. While Rin Tosaka is often seen using it, the curse is actually most practiced by the Adelfelt lineage, being some of the best Gundo users across the globe. In summation, it is possible to contain magical energy into culturally significant symbols that, when invoked, will cast spells based on their meaning. Runes are the dominant form of this symbology, originating from Scandinavia and heavily influencing Celtic myth as well. It is the go-to practice of magecraft for Irish warriors such as Cuchulainn, Skahak, and Bazette, and certainly a key asset for Germanic heroes such as Sigurd and Brynhild. All this considered, rune magecraft remains one of the less popular forms practiced within the association. Thus, before we move on, it will be imperative to discuss the Mages Association itself, focusing on the various departments and affiliated groups within. After dipping our feet into some regional magecraft, the Celtic runes, I'd like to take a step back and once again look at the big picture. While magecraft is certainly not exclusive to any one region, The most prevalent gathering of mages can be found within the Mages Association. Most any mage seeking notoriety or prestige will either be part of or in close contact with the association. Thus, for today's lesson, I will be providing an overview of this organization and its influence on the world. Magecraft as we know it today is secretive, spoken of and demonstrated only to those within the community. This wasn't always the case. Magecraft was openly used and practiced during the Age of Gods and up until the Middle Ages. Around this time, certain mages began to feel that concealing their craft from the public eye would ensure longevity for the practice. These mages formed what is now known as the Mages Association, an organization dedicated to preserving magecraft from the shadows of society. To that end, they create and enforce regulations to control and contain thaumaturgical research. Granted, this effort is a selfish one. The association cracks down on criminal activity involving magecraft, but not out of goodwill or a desire to protect commoners. Rather, the association does so only to prevent revealing their craft. Thus, they care not for the nightmarish crimes mages commit, so long as they do not draw suspicion from authorities. While certainly the most active body of mages, the association does have a limited reach. The Middle East and Asian philosophies of magecraft are not affiliated, and even conflict with the association at times, which is a shame given the various laboratories and research institutions the association makes use of that certain regions are denied access to. Perhaps this is for the best. While the association provides education to applicable candidates, the motive for doing so is again self-centered. It's a quid pro quo scenario, really. Mages will only reveal their own findings if they have something to gain in the process. One collective burden the association handles is the relationship between magecraft and the Holy Church, which considers the practice taboo and blasphemous. Both combat and mediation are essential to ensure mages have a place free from the Church's restrictions. The Mages Association has 3 distinct branches, which have drifted apart with the passage of time. These are the Clock Tower, the Atlas Academy, and the Wandering Sea, with the former serving as the association's official headquarters. While the concealment of magecraft became prevalent in the Middle Ages, the Clock Tower's formation dates back to before the death of Christ. Today, it can be found in London's British Museum, looking innocuous with its brick and stone 12th century design. Beyond this, however, the Clock Tower is anything but. As gods and phantasmal beasts fled the world to its reverse side with the dawn of the Age of Man, there was a dragon the size of a mountain known as Albion. Albion did not start his journey until after the other gods had already departed. In an attempt to dig his way to the reverse side of the world, Albion died, and the Clock Tower was built atop his corpse. One of its deeper floors, the Spirit Tomb Albion, is a perfect den for obtaining supplies and keeping magical beasts. Even deeper is the Callian Observatory, the tower's oldest classroom where ceiling designations are debated. It's not just the tower itself I'm referring to either. There are many affiliated buildings strewn throughout the city, such as the Norwich Student Dormitory and 40 other dorms, research buildings, and business districts that tend to the tower's mages. Despite this near-pristine image, the Clock Tower is a place of conflict, with mages caught in political power struggles between factions and departments. At the top of this pecking order are 3 main factions, each consisting of one of the most esteemed mage families: the Bartholomew, Trambelio, and Meluastia. Below them are the Lords, mages who hold great influence in the association by heading up the Clock Tower's various departments. Between the Lords and their dominating factions is an elitist culture that discriminates based on political influence. An example of this would be Asian mages. Not only are Asian mage philosophies looked down upon by the elite, but mages from Asia also struggle to thrive in such a European-dominated institution. This is unfortunate, given that some of the tower's most skilled mages happen to be from Japan. The Tosaka family alone is able to thrive simply from royalties earned on patented magic inventions. Thankfully, while reputable families can make it into the Clock Tower on recommendation alone, new members can still be admitted after taking a series of exams. The more merit attributed to a given candidate, the more freedoms they benefit from, such as being able to bring along apprentices tuition-free. Even discrimination cannot eliminate sheer talent. Currently, the Clock Tower has 12 lords, which divide the institution into 12 main departments of study. What you are learning in this course could be considered part of General Fundamentals, the faculty of the Mistal family, which most mages first invest 5 years of study toward before moving on to a more specialized department. Those who continue their study of fundamentals move on to individual fundamentals, the faculty of Solanea. Spiritual Evocation, the faculty of the Euliphus, studies the magecraft of summoning spiritual beings. Its head is the Nuada Re Sofitia Re family, more specifically Solau's father. This department has had much success, affiliated with King Solomon's ability to summon demons. Then there's Mineralogy, the faculty of Kishir, which studies the properties of mineral substances. It is fittingly named after Kishir Zelret Schweinorg and his work with crystals and jewels. Separate from spiritual beings, there is a department for Zoology, the faculty of Chimera, which studies the magecraft of organic life. The Anthropology, or Lore department, is designated as the faculty of Brishason. They're quite specialized, studying relics not from our world. While this is the smallest department, their findings can affect our understanding of the universe itself. Botany, the faculty of Eumina, is a department dedicated exclusively to witchcraft. More recognizable is the Department of Celestial Bodies for being the faculty of Animosphere. As the name implies, this department studies the stars and planets, encompassing both astronomy and astrology. It is unsurprising that the Animosphere family are the ones to establish the Chaldea Security Organization, a facility that observes the Earth's future. The Creation Department, the faculty of Value, on the other hand, is more obscure. It uses magecraft to create items both sentient and inanimate. They pursue the creation of what they deem the most beautiful person with an artistic ambition. The Department of Curse, the faculty of Jigmarie, obviously studies magical spells that enchant or otherwise ail their victims. Archaeology, the faculty of Astaire, is a department dedicated to universal research, broadly looking into history. Also called Rock's Road, these mages keep themselves outside of Clock Tower drama, focusing solely on academia. The youngest department in the Clock Tower is Modern Magecraft Theories, the faculty of Norwick. This department looks into compiling magecraft of past centuries into a more general practice that is more accessible and efficient for new generations of mages. It was headed by the Elmalloy family, but their successor Rhinus is too young to take over after the death of Kenneth Elmalloy Archibald. Thus, the lordship is occupied by Waver Velvet, who serves as a temporary stand-in as Elmalloy II. While these are the 12 departments, there is actually a 13th that isn't formally included. Policies is a department more concerned with politics and social studies than actual mysticism. Now, these are areas of study and have no bearing on the individual merits of a given mage. For that, the Clock Tower has a ranking system. Newcomers and youth begin with the title of Count or Frame, referring to the eldest or youngest child of a generation of siblings. These are mostly a placeholder until mages are able to properly stand as the heads of their families. The Cause rank refers to open mages who have the base qualifications to competently study magecraft. Their potential has yet to be shown. Some mages mature without displaying any outstanding capabilities, such as Waver Velvet in his adulthood. Mages like him are considered Fez, or Festival ranked. Moving upward, we have the rank of Pride or Law for mages who demonstrate considerable talent. The most talented mages are typically ranked Brand or Color. That said, there is an even higher rank, Grand or Crown, which has rarely been given out over the entire history of the Clock Tower. Toko Aozaki managed to reach this rank at the age of 20, which made the Aozaki family's decision to endorse Aoko as the family head all the more devastating. Lastly, mages valued by the association are identified by both rank and color. Their individual abilities are ranked from red, blue, yellow, purple, green, and black, respectively. Thus far, We've spoken of how the association propagates Magecraft through education and research, but it's important to address the lengths the association will go to in order to preserve itself and the secrecy of its practices. In the clock tower's depths is the Callian Observatory, where the Secret Judgment Division monitors mages of great interest to the association. These may be mages who are so talented or unique, the association wishes to claim ownership of them, or mages who use their talents recklessly and expose their pursuits publicly. Said mages are given sealing designations, which are seen as both honorable and incriminating. Honorable in the sense that a mage is worthy of attention, but detrimental in that those who are designated are heavily restricted. They are essentially left with two choices: to become hermits, practicing their craft under association supervision, or to persist at the risk of being killed by enforcers. The association employs 30 enforcers, who train in assassinating mages. They dedicate their lives to this pursuit, even though actual sealing designations are so rare that any given enforcer may be assigned just one per decade. They suffer perhaps the worst discrimination in the clock tower, being looked down on by the elite, despite serving to protect their way of life. The association also puts out its bounties to freelance assassins, which force the enforcers to compete with the likes of Natalia Kaminsky and Kiritsugu Emiya to earn a living. Those who succeed in this field tend to develop a thick skin and detachment to others. The clock tower plays host to a special holding area called the Bottom of the Bridge, where the most dangerous mages are imprisoned. The most iconic of whom is Gazami the Wraith, a mage whose attribute is vaguely considered to be the most troublesome ever recorded. Of course, the clock tower has its pros and cons. Despite the hassle, most mages still join the association for its provided resources and knowledge. In exchange, they have to deal with a frustrating network of factions and lords, all vying for the association's power and budget. Could the association use more harmony, or is this cutthroat environment ideal for pushing thaumaturgical research to its fullest? Sadly, this remains untested, and unlikely to change regardless. With the abundance of material still left to cover, I'm afraid it is best to divide this topic into separate lectures. After all, while the clock tower is the largest, most complex branch of the association, we also need to devote ourselves to the other, more mysterious branches: Atlas and the Wandering Sea. In our previous lesson, I began our look into the Mages Association with the Clock Tower, the association's de facto headquarters. While it is true that much of the iconic imagery we associate with Magecraft comes from this establishment, it is critical we not forget the other two branches of the association: Atlas and the Wandering Sea. Perhaps it is easiest to think of these branches as alternate approaches to Magecraft, each looking at mysticism from a fresh paradigm. Atlas, in particular, is referred to interchangeably as a temple, academy, or institute. Another name Atlas goes by is Titan's Pit, fitting to the Titan Atlas. Despite this nomenclature being Greek, Atlas is actually comprised of Egyptian descendants of the goddess Isis. As such, this Egyptian temple has been around longer than the clock tower, and its researchers study one of the most ancient forms of Magecraft: alchemy. Certainly, alchemists exist outside of the temple, but Atlas holds true to a commitment to investigating the role Magecraft plays on the world at large, from a macro perspective. While this includes the swirl of the root, Atlas alchemists don't omit the importance of our universe, and seek to understand it on a more profound level, especially in regard to our future. It is perhaps because of this dedication and focus that the Atlas Temple has become known as the most independent of the association's branches, being at odds with the Clock Tower, going so far as to have its own unique relationship to the Holy Church, at times lending out its alchemists on a contractual basis. Geographically speaking, Atlas is located underground beneath Egypt's mountains. Within, alchemists have their own dedicated workshops and utilize laboratories built on technology unknown to the rest of the association. Structurally, it contains a system of tunnels arranged as a labyrinth, designed to make it harder for individuals to leave. In that regard, it is a one-way security system that is easy to enter and troublesome to exit, and is enforced by automatous familiars as an added measure. As such, it is a reclusive facility perfect for research that gives off an unsettling vibe, much like a tomb. At its core is a massive cavern as large as an entire town. Fitting to Atlas's design, the research conducted within is fruitful yet exclusive. Inside, geniuses uninhabited by ethics find new discoveries and build horrific weapons. They are limited only in that their ideas and creations never leave. For 2,000 years, Atlas has defended this policy. In other words, what happens in Atlas stays in Atlas. Of course, we wouldn't be able to speak of them if such rules were absolute. As I mentioned earlier, Atlas alchemists leave the temple in order to assist the outside world. This is to fulfill the obligations detailed in 7 ancient contracts that have been lost to the organization. Of them, 4 of these contracts have been recovered and used to procure Atlas aid. While alchemy itself truly deserves its own lecture, let me for now state that Atlas's academy transcends the apparent process practiced by the clock tower. It is not a mere study of turning metal into gold. The origin of their alchemy can surely be traced back to Egyptian metallurgy, but such feats are shallow representations of their study. In philosophical terms, Atlas Academy is focused around humanity, evolving to solve the universe's problems. Their true strength comes from analyzing data, improving the human form to be capable of faster, more accurate calculations. Traditionally, we think of calculations being processed by the human brain, but Atlas alchemists consider the entirety of man, all 5 senses, the mind, body, and soul, to be critical to efficient analysis. To break more traditions, most Atlas alchemists aren't even conventional mages. They lack magic circuits, but don't see that as a hindrance. Their mantra, then, is we have no need to be the strongest, we create that which is the strongest. They view machines as an extension of the human body, and thus invent devices to compensate for their shortcomings. This has led Atlas toward major discoveries of the soul and the spiritron energy within the soul, which has proven useful in the creation of artificial circuits and homunculi. The most successful of these homunculi is Rani the Eighth, created by alchemist Sealim Eltnamri Atlasia through cutting-edge Atlas technology. In many ways, Rani can be seen as a superior, futuristic alternative for humanity, and serves as both mage and alchemist herself. Her computational skills are unmatched, as she contains a version of Atlas's supercomputer Hermes, which we'll come back to later. If the Atlas Temple's alchemy is philosophized as humanity solving the universe's problems, then, no pun intended, one of their greatest problems is fate itself. In a broad sense, they wish to transform not just matter, but events. In pursuit of this, Atlas focuses on predicting the future. They rely heavily on the mentality of Laplace's demon, which posits that if we were to know the location and momentum of every atom in the universe, we could effectively predict the future based on the past. This mindset relies on accepting determinism, that all things, even those we consider to be our own choices, are effectively determined by what came before, that the universe is a maddeningly complex chain of cause and effect. Tragically, Atlas's predictions are less than optimistic. Genius alchemists, such as Atlas's first director and Zepia Eltnam Oberon, have inevitably predicted the end of our world. This prediction has become a primary concern for many alchemists who wish to use the power of science and technology to avoid the world's end. It is a tricky process, however. These alchemists understand that creating weapons meant to save the world may very well hasten its destruction, and so they research mysteries without relying on mana. Thus, over the years, the Atlas Temple has also become a tomb for many unique mystic codes, most of which are decommissioned for being too powerful. Chief among these are the 7 superweapons, each capable of destroying the world and are never to be used. For the most part, these weapons remain secretive, but mages have come to understand the workings of 2 superweapons, Black Beryl and Logos React. Black Beryl, also called Longinus, is a conceptual weapon, a tool created around the concept of imposing lifespans. In theory, this means forcing otherwise immortal creatures to have a definite lifespan, to force mortality on the eternal. In practice, the Black Barrel's bullets are made of true ether, which can disintegrate the more conventional ether, or grain, that comprises heavenly bodies. Ultimately, it is an anti-god weapon. While we mages know of its existence, none have been able to actually witness it. Supposedly, it takes the shape of a typical rifle, with modifications made to fashion it into a sniper rifle. The reason it's so mysterious to mages is that, while Atlas has sealed the weapon away from the rest of the association, they have entrusted it to the Holy Church as a result of their 7 contracts. The weapon was once equipped by a church executor, Ciel, in order to combat Arcuade Brunstud, but was ultimately never used. A much less powerful variant, the barrel replica, is used by Atlas alchemist Sion Eltna Metlasia. This variant is shaped like a handgun, more specifically a CZ-75. The other known weapon was leaked quite a long time ago. Like Black Barrel, its appearance is elusive. We know of it only through its replica, a bizarre mystic code created after King Arthur's death by her devious sister, Morgan Le Fay. Its primary purpose is to seal the tremendous powers of the Holy Lance Rongominiad, leading mages to speculate that the original weapon also served a similar purpose, such as a barrier or cage. The replica is unique, however, in that it has a personality named Ad, apparently based on Sir Kay of the Round Table. Now, more Western-centric alchemy speaks of a treasure known as the Philosopher's Stone, a mystical catalyst for alchemic reactions. This treasure in the eyes of Atlas, however, must undoubtedly be Tri-Hermes, the pseudo-spiritronic processor, a set of obelisks made of photonic crystal that function as a massive computer. It is located at the center of the Academy, and may very well be Atlas's greatest achievement, as the technology used to create it far exceeds what humanity is supposed to have attained in our modern era. While the data recorded into Tri-Hermes can only be accessed by Atlas alchemists, a copy was made for use at the Chaldea Security Organization. The copy is known as Trismegistus, the Spiritron calculation engine, and is a critical component in calculating data used in ray shifting, as well as interpreting observations made by Sheba. While the Atlas Temple has been characterized as an underground tomb, the Wandering Sea, Baldanders, is known as the Moving Tomb. Rather than being comprised of a single group, the Wandering Sea consists of various smaller organizations throughout Northern Europe. In that regard, they were the prominent European branch prior to the Clock Tower, and have mostly stayed out of contact ever since. This can be troubling, because while the other branches have a distinct geographical location, the Wandering Sea exists within a floating mountain range that, as the name suggests, often traverses the ocean. To fully comprehend this structure, we must understand the concept of textures. These are, essentially, layers of reality that collectively make up the world. Thankfully, you're already aware of 2 such layers, our present physical world and the reverse side. Well, the Wandering Sea is another texture existing between the 2. My personal favorite understanding of this is that textures are separate planes of reality that exist simultaneously, but are generally imperceptible to one another. Visually speaking, then, the Wandering Sea is located within a mountain range that floats about the fierce oceans of a separate plane of reality, making it by far the most mysterious branch of the association. In fact, there is but one day each year the Wandering Sea makes itself available to our texture, which happens to be December 31st. It is during this time that outside mages are able to interact with the Wandering Sea's residents. To do so, they must board a sturdy enough vehicle to endure the torrential waters and enter the only entrance, a docking area beneath the mountain. Perhaps you might be wondering, why go through all this trouble? Honestly, it seems more preferential. The mages of the Wandering Sea only care for Magecraft at its peak during the Age of Gods, and show only disdain to the modern Magecraft studied today. This is merely a generalization, though, as groups within the Wandering Sea interact with the rest of the association to varying capacities. For instance, the Prague Association is a group of traditional alchemists. Because they do not agree with Atlas's philosophy on the practice, the 2 groups seldom get along. In contrast, Sponheim Abbey is an institution that remains in touch with the Clock Tower. The, dare I say, raving lunatic Cornelius Alba, prior to meeting his end, was arranged to be the institution's next director. Lastly, there is the Thule Society, which studies rune magecraft. That said, it's a very selfish study, as the institution hoards the original runic scripts the craft is based on. As a result, the practice of rune magecraft in the modern era is in severe decline. Generally speaking, the Wandering Sea is just as secretive, if not more so than Atlas, with even less notoriety. The most active they've ever been is with Chaldea, specifically in light of the hostile takeover that forced its original staff to flee. It is in this regard that they are relevant to our purposes. In summation, the Atlas Institute is an Egyptian-based underground society responsible for a very unique and advanced form of magecraft that utilizes Spiritron technology over magic circuits. While their secrets typically remain within the temple, contractual obligations to the outside world have allowed Atlas technology to spread. Their foremost goal is to overcome a mysterious threat predicted to end the world. In contrast, the Wandering Sea is another tomb of sorts that travels out of reach from the rest of the association. While Atlas is concerned with humanity's future, the Wandering Sea only truly cares about the origin and ancestry of Magecraft, and typically remains out of contact so long as worldly events do not affect them. I'll admit, this lecture has been very broad in its reach. For a change of pace, I will next speak of a more practical matter: familiars. In our previous lesson, I concluded our overview of the Mages Association, more specifically Atlas and the Wandering Sea. It was dense, to say the least. While it is valuable to have a grasp of the association's structure, it's time for us to return to more practical matters. Thus, for this lesson, I will speak of familiars. We already know that mages keep themselves secluded from normal society, doing their best not to reveal their practice to the public. As such, it is beneficial for a mage to accomplish minor tasks, such as espionage and gathering, without traveling the streets in person. It is from this need that mages first implemented the use of familiars, special assistants mages dispatch on their behalf, bound either by contract or through direct control. While a familiar can act as an extension of the mage's mind and body, you must not forget that familiars are separate beings, some clearly having a will of their own. The conditions are important, as there are many ways to obtain them. Most commonly, there are corpse familiars, created by combining consciousness with a body of a perished animal. This consciousness typically comes from an apparition, the ghostly remnants of a departed soul's memories. Mages must obviously repair the bodily damage of their host, but they must also include part of their own body that is dense with magic circuits. Most commonly, this would be a mage's eyes, hair, or blood. While familiars have magic circuits, the mana channeled through them is provided by the master. Animals such as cats, dogs, birds, and mice are ideal because they are easy to control and require little effort. Though, over time, the physical makeup of these creatures tends to change into that of monsters. Although it is much more difficult, requiring far more mana, deceased humans are also a valid source for familiars. Not all familiars require a soul of their own. The most disposable ones typically don't, but the ones that do are much stronger. This might seem ideal, but such familiars also have their own sense of reason. Independence like this has its pros and cons. On one hand, it allows familiars to converse with and provide mental perspective to their masters, but it also allows them to turn to betrayal. Perhaps the greatest benefit of a conscious and independently willed familiar is that they are able to live on should their master die. For instance, Len is a familiar made from the body of a cat and the soul of a human girl. She spent her days peacefully with her master until they died. After that, Len survived by obtaining mana as a succubus, carrying on her master's legacy in memory and talent, to an extent anyway. A con of such familiars is that they cannot be controlled remotely by their master. At best, a mage simply hopes to share the familiar's senses for a time, in order to vicariously experience life through them. A way to get around this, you might think, is to simply transfer one's soul into another body where a soul is already present. Such is the case for Zokin Mato, whose worms serve as familiars when he reconstructs new bodies for himself. As mentioned in a previous lesson, however, doing so corrupts the soul. Without true magic or Ilia's dress of heaven, a complete transfer of the soul is nigh impossible. An obscure exception is Nero Chaos, whose 666 beasts serve as familiars, but are technically still a part of him. While animals are commonly used as familiars, mages have had great success creating their own in the form of golems, dolls, and even slimes. While I just colored such soulless beings as weak, the technique and composition of them play a tremendous role in their strength. For instance, dolls, or puppets, are mystic constructs designed specifically to be stronger than their puppet masters. Mages such as Toko Aozaki and Cornelius Alba specialize in the creation of these puppets. Doing so is no easy feat, as puppets can be as anatomically complicated as an actual human, the best of which are indistinguishable from the genuine article. Golems are of the same ilk, but are entirely made from basic products of nature, such as wood and soil. Golems were first made by Kabbalists seeking a way to create life in imitation of how God created Adam. Based on appearances, however, I think it's safe to assume mages have taken some artistic liberty, such as with Avisebron's Kater Malkuth, which despite being the size of a giant, births Eden beneath its every step. Blurring the line between puppet and golem are automata, which are named for being able to function autonomously. In this sense, they are living machines that develop souls of their own and function independently. Most automata were made prior to the 17th century, when Magecraft was easier to conjure, such as the case for the Karakuri doll, Kato Danzo, created by the mage Kashin Koji. Making automata in this matter has become quite rare, as mages struggle to make their automata strong enough to fight in combat against other mages. What's even more rare is that, to continue their manufacturing, mages have actually turned to science. Their greatest modern achievement is the automatous golem Trimao, who serves Rhinus of the Clock Tower. Her design has become the foundation for future creations. Perhaps the most disturbing familiars are the dead. Servants of the dead apostles, created when a victim of vampiric attack survives off its master's blood. Well, the body survives anyway. Without their mind and soul, the dead can be controlled by the apostles who create them. Unlike normal corpses, the dead turn to ash upon their destruction, leaving behind no trace of influence. The highest order of familiar are referred to as ghost liner, spirits or demons who form a contract with their master. Technically speaking, the heroic spirit servants summoned during Holy Grail Wars meet this classification. Servants are very similar to other familiars in that they thrive off a spiritual connection with their master, but differ in that they require the Holy Grail's help for summoning, and traditional familiars certainly don't need command seals to compel them. Thus, servants are classified as ghost liner, even though they stand in a league of their own. For the remainder of this lesson, I would like to point out both common and unusual examples of familiars, in order to provide you with a diverse assortment of mages' creations. To start, the Tosaka family uses their jewel Magecraft to form bird-like statues, such as amethyst owls. These are like jewel golems that Rin and her father Tokiyomi used to survey Fuyuki City during the wars. While certainly a puppet master, Toko Aozaki uses a handful of different familiars. Among her puppets is a model shaped after her younger sister Aoko. Quite hauntingly, it has both a crow and spider mode for mobility, and can self-destruct on command. Then there is Lu Beowulf, a phantasmal beast born from the folklore of werewolves. In the 18th century, Beo was incarnated in a werewolf village. Revered for their golden color, the same as the original golden werewolf, the villagers hoped Beo would revive their declining species. But after realizing Beo was genderless, unable to mate, and technically not even an actual werewolf, they sold Beo to Toko. She does not bind Beowulf with her magecraft. Rather, their relationship is predicated on the fact that Beo likes Toko's scent, and that she promises them fights against other mysteries. In such battles, Beo thrives for being able to absorb strong impacts, able to take Aoko's kicks without so much as flinching. When in a serious confrontation, Toko takes with her a projector that shapes an ether clump through its lens. It takes the form of a monstrous cat, but can also be used to heal her. As if that weren't fierce enough, she carries a nightmarish demon inside a sealed box. Contained within is an infinite hell, a deep darkness that, when unleashed, pours out a series of tendrils to catch its prey. With thousands of tiny mouths, the tendrils devour victims while dragging them back into the box. Given that Toko is trying to lay low, out of the association's reach, she limits its use considerably. Most audaciously, the Magus Merlin managed to tame a beast of the planet, Kath Palug, a tremendously powerful entity contained to the size of an adorable pet. In other worlds, it is said this beast is called Primate Murder, and is the pet of Altruge Brunstud. Kiritsugu Emiya and his mentor Natalia once had a perilous encounter with the mage Odd Borzak, whose familiar was a swarm of poisonous demonic bees. Natalia was bested by them when they burst from his dead corpse, which I'll admit is a clever, if not creepy, application for them. The ancient mage King Solomon learned from the manuscript Lemmageton or Getia how to convene with demons, making the 72 demon gods his familiars. After Solomon's death, these demons formed a hive mind and sought to fix humanity's flaws through methods Solomon himself would never have approved of. Semiramis, who was abandoned by her mother Terketo, survived by being raised by doves. As a servant, she is able to call upon her friendship with these doves, who serve as her scouts, carrying messages and tracking trails of mana. Both she and her fellow caster Medea conjure dragon-tooth warriors, literally made from dragon fangs being planted into the earth. These automaton golems function as mass-produced, disposable soldiers. The Einsburn homunculus Irisfeel and her daughter Elia make familiars from their own hair, a technique called Engel Note, Angel's Poem. With their hair, they create birds, Elia's being Storch Ritter, Knight of Stork. Elia can form up to 4 of these birds at once, each being able to protect her and fire blasts of mana with the power of a miniature magus. Misaya Oji, a student of the Rayan Girls Academy, forms a contract with low-level spirits disguised as fairies in order to manipulate and gather intel on her fellow students. A most peculiar familiar is known as Nanako. She is the conscious form of the 7th Holy Scripture, a deadly weapon of the Holy Church wielded by Ciel. It was designed as an iron hammer to prevent souls from reincarnating. Its creation resulted from the slaying of a unicorn, using the horn as a key and fusing it with the soul of a deceased girl. Over nearly 1,000 years, an elemental spirit, Nanako, formed within, and thanks to Ciel modifying the scripture, Nanako manifests in physical form. Sakura, empowered by the corrupt Holy Grail with the hollow element, is able to conjure shadow giants that serve as materialized curses. While extremely dense in mana, each one capable of withstanding noble phantasms, Sakura can conjure them in droves. In the Moon Cell, BB uses shapeshifter programs of a similar appearance to try and restrain Hakuno to the Sakura Labyrinth. Anastasia, daughter of the Russian Tsar, came to know of a monster named V, possessed by the Russian Empire. At the time of her death, Anastasia was able to contract with V, allowing her as a servant to manipulate ice. V is a spirit of sorts, born in the image of the monster V from Russian literature and other Slavic folklores. V remains by Anastasia, covering for most of her mana consumption. In summation, familiars are creatures or tools created by mages to do their bidding. They can be without souls, requiring complete control from their master, or they can have their own consciousness to mixed effect. Many familiars, such as golems, puppets, animals, and automata, are created by mages, while others, such as spirits or demons, are bound to mages by contract or circumstance. As the subject of familiars frequently deals with matters of death, it should only be fitting that our next lesson cover the thaumaturgical branch of necromancy, as a case study of the mage, Kairi Shishigo. In our previous lesson, I spoke of familiars, the creatures that do a mage's bidding. Death can sometimes play a key role in the construction of a familiar, so I feel that now would be a prime opportunity to continue the theme. Today, I wish to speak of the thaumaturgical branch known as necromancy. This will serve as one paradigm of many through which we can understand the life of mages, what it truly takes to succeed as one, and at what cost. About death. Even for mages, the concept of death can be haunting. Mages, while they do not always show it, have those they care for and love. Only the most cold and calculating of them have no affection whatsoever for the living. Even so, from a practical standpoint, death is far from a person's end. After all, a human is the synthesis of body, mind, and soul, making death nothing more than a separation of these components. The body that is left behind from death has many uses. Even without the soul's presence, a corpse retains residual mana and can be utilized as a material in thaumaturgical processes. Such is necromancy, the practice of processing and manipulating the corpses of the dead. Mages who choose this path effectively preside over death, embracing a cold life of solitude and darkness. While most mages seek their own self-preservation, necromancers have incentive to put their own lives on the line. They are at their most proficient in places drenched in human death, and what better place to find death en masse than a battlefield, which is guaranteed to be strewn with corpses by combat's end. Morgues and graveyards might have their fair share of corpses, but they are certainly less fruitful of fresh materials, and raiding them serves to expose Magecraft to the public. Instead, the more adept necromancers scope out war like hawks, flocking to revolutions and genocide, especially between rival mages. Albeit dangerous, this proves ideal, as war is constant in our world. Primarily, necromancers will turn fallen bodies into their own minions as zombified familiars. These can be enhanced through Magecraft, granting them different tiers of strength and intelligence. Other times, necromancers opt to restructure corpses to form threatening monsters. These bodies needn't merely be human either. Phantasmal beasts and animals are also quite viable. Even so, there is always the chance that an undead familiar may turn on its master. The bodies of the dead remain with traits inherited from their time alive, such as anger or regret, which serve as a double-edged sword of sorts. Thus, in preparation, necromancers must be prepared to slay their own creations. Arguably, a safer approach would be to convert corpses into inventive and unique mystic codes, or tools that a mage can keep in their arsenal. This is what the famed necromancer Kairi Shishigo is known for. In his case, though, beyond just tools, Kairi turns the dead into his very weapons, taking an even more direct role in combat. His case is far from a celebratory one, unfortunately. As you've learned in previous lessons, mage families often struggle to keep their lineage alive over generations, and this becomes even more difficult when mages relocate far from their ancestors. Such is the case for Kairi's family, who moved from the Far East and suffered a major decline in mana potency. Despite this, both Kairi and his father Toki were exemplary mages. A mage family from the Far East enduring for 7 generations was quite remarkable given the circumstances. However, Kairi himself suffers from a manifestation of his family's curse that renders him sterile, unable to pass on his genetics to a child. To overcome this, his family had him adopt a distant relative as his stepdaughter. It was a move of desperation. A family has no future without an heir, but the transferring of a parent's magical crest onto their child is dangerous as is. There's the risk of rebound or rejection, which becomes far more prevalent the further the recipient is in relation to the crest's current holder. The odds of his stepdaughter surviving the transplant were low. A colder mage would simply accept the risk and press forward, but Kairi cared deeply for his stepdaughter and was devastated when the procedure wound up killing her. Unable to bear this pain further, he accepted himself as the last of his lineage and rejected a life of research in order to profit from his necromancy as a mercenary. A dropout from the clock tower, Kairi's status as a mage dropped, while his spellcasting remained as strong as ever. By wandering the world reaping war zones, he maximized his potential as a necromancer, gathering mage corpses and their magic crests as material for his craft. That said, while he sports a daring attitude and outgoing persona, he still feels the pain of losing his stepdaughter. Under the guise of continuing his legacy, Kairi aims to find a way to bring his daughter back, placing his hopes in the Holy Grail to perform a miracle. Until then, he tries to cope through the unfortunate habit of smoking, such as common for mages. His preferred cigarette is an exceptionally rare Taiwanese brand called Dragon Smoke. He intentionally smokes them because their horrid taste makes him feel the world's transient nature. Perhaps this informs his approach to combat. The mystic codes he creates combine elements of the dead with modern weaponry. He is most like Kiritsugu Emiya in this regard, and his weapons are considered just as heretical. Regardless, it's hard to argue against how effective they are. Kairi fights with a sawed-off shotgun that fires human fingers as bullets. The result is a deadly combination of physical force and the evocation of the Gundo curse on his targets. The bullets embed themselves into the target, releasing the curse to burst their heart for a sure kill. Thanks to the magical properties of this shotgun, he need not worry about precise aim. The bullets will actually hone onto his enemies. Despite this, the gun needs reloading, and to provide cover during that time, he relies on unique grenades. These grenades are made from a mage's heart, stuffed with teeth and nails to provide shrapnel. When hit by the shrapnel, victims will essentially die from concentrated poison. Kairi has a number of tools in his arsenal beyond offensive weaponry. He can deploy a reanimated monkey hand to construct a barrier, and the eyes of animals to supplement his own vision remotely. He's also quite adept at making herbal mixtures. His most iconic concoction is an antidote for poison made from the venom of a hydra. Simply handling and processing the venom is an exceptionally deadly 3-hour process, and even then, the resulting poison is only enough to coat a single dagger. Of course, Kairi is definitely not the only necromancer out there, though I will say their respective approaches are quite unique. The deceased mage Trevor Pelham Codrington was a necromancer who constructed his workshop over a barren wasteland, constantly ravaged by lightning. He combined his talents as a necromancer with the help of fairies like Fae to turn those who died in his wasteland into ravenous black dogs as a defensive measure. Many necromancers still involved with the clock tower are far more tame, avoiding the controversial techniques of their ambitious peers, making it so that necromancy doesn't bask in the spotlight of study or discourse. Yet I nonetheless wanted to enlighten you of their existence. In summation, necromancy is the craft of processing and utilizing corpses as tools for magecraft. This can mean animating the dead, constructing creatures, or embedding their bodies into mystic codes. To succeed in this craft, necromancers isolate themselves to catacombs, tombs, and graveyards, while taking to the battlefield to raid the bodies of newly fallen warriors. Not all are quite this ambitious, but such is the life of Kairi Shishigo, the most infamous necromancer. He remains in contact with the clock tower, serving as a mercenary who sticks to the underground society of Magecraft. Despite being so capable, his feats come as a result of his own weakness, his inability to protect his beloved stepchild. While his combative nature stands out the most among his peers, other necromancers certainly keep their heads down, thriving in society off the bodily remains of the deceased. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all our anime lore, discussions, and Let's Play content.
you can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or a YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like spicy exclusive vids and early access.
As always, celebrate your fandom. I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: VideoGamer75, Dante Pendragon, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, The Nonchalant Ostrich, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Lord Ormagoden, Freebrick, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Link Pendrago, Olympian Doll, Observer Bellis, James Hewitt, Uncanny EXP, Scout, Zamas Autonomous, Jared, Yukie Iros, Crow Calum, Saul Soto, Tristan Riggin, Major, Sogai CH, Caitlin P, Vladimirovna, The Taz 96, Kengo X 77, Hersha of E-Rated Hands, Alistair Bernadotte, and Akakaze Yume. Thank you all so much.